Hey guys, so it's 10 o'clock at night and I just finished crying. I had a really kind of weird evening because I was on YouTube and I don't search for withdrawal videos anymore. I just don't feel the need to watch them now. And I was actually just watching a random Mila Kunis speaks Russian video. I don't even know how I got on that. I'm like really intrigued by languages. So for some reason, I ended up on that. And then I was on my home feed and this video popped up and it was titled something like, how does anxiety relief fit into the diagnoses of mast cell activation syndrome, mold toxicity, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, POTS? And I decided to click on it because it was only about 10 minutes long and I got really emotional because it's so strange to me, and how, I've been deep diving a lot, not into with the withdrawal space. I mean, I spent years researching that, but more into these other chronic condition syndromes that don't have a lot of understanding behind them. And so this woman was telling her story about how she had been to the Mayo Clinic. She had diagnoses of POTS, so she had a tilt table test that was positive. She had positive mold toxicity reports. She had a diagnosis of, was it chronic fatigue or Lyme? I think it was Lyme disease. So all of these conditions that can feel impossible to treat because there really isn't proper treatment for a lot of these chronic things, and they're so poorly understood. And the way she was describing the symptoms and the diagnostic process behind what she was told she had, I mean, if I had a blindfold on, I would never know that she wasn't talking about withdrawal. So she was talking about head pressure, DPDR, super severe anxiety, PPPD, which I can never remember what it stands for, persistent perceptual, whatever, dizziness, chronic feelings of bodiness, moving floor underneath you, tinnitus. It was just so oddly similar, and she never mentioned anything about psychiatric drugs. Yet the video was so similar to what I went through, what my clients go through, that I was very intrigued. And she was saying that she spent a great deal of time on Reddit. I don't know if she said Reddit specifically, I believe she did, but on all of the forums for all of these different conditions. And it's similar things. People on there saying, I've had this condition for 25 years. There's no cure. We're still waiting for the right biomedical research or whatever to get us out of this horrible syndrome, and all kinds of horror stories. And she was feeling like there was no way out because she had multiple of these chronic conditions. And it really stood out to me because she said at the end of the day, so she's recovered now, what got her out of it and what she came to understand these conditions to mean is that you have a sensitized nervous system. And I feel like a broken record when I say this, but just watching this kind of reiterated what I've been thinking so much about lately is, does it matter what caused the symptoms? Because they're the same, like across all of these conditions, the symptoms are the same. And what they describe in the chronic fatigue community is can't sit still, pacing around, can't relax, all of these tremors and vibrations. And it's exactly what we would call akathisia. And it just kind of gets the gears turning in my head because she was saying, like I said, she was in all of these different forums and went down all these different rabbit holes of gut dysbiosis and detoxing and did all these protocols and took a million supplements, what we all tend to do as well. And what recovered her was fixing her sensitized nervous system and desensitizing herself by doing different exposures and calming down the stress response and getting out of sympathetic dominance. And I haven't looked in detail at all of her channel. I watched a few of her videos and it looks like she has a guide to help people through this, but it's the same story over and over and over. It's pulling yourself out of sympathetic dominance, and it differs from anxiety. So it's not anxiety in the regular sense of the word. It's these multiple stressors have hit the nervous system and caused severe sensitization that spills into all of these neurological and chronic symptoms. And it just, I don't know, I'm fascinated by this. And it took me until I would say this year, my 6th year in this community, or is it 7th now, that, I never considered this, or I never put this together. I always was looking just at withdrawal specifically, but I'm just fascinated by how many of these other things are similar, and how each of these groups narrows down the symptoms to whatever the initial trigger was. So in the case of Lyme, it's the tick bite, it's the bacteria that go along with Lyme disease. And in COVID, it's always about the spike protein. And in protracted withdrawal, it's always about the receptors. And I just wonder if that is the whole story. And I do believe that there's an initial injury, or an initial, I don't even know if injury is the right word, an initial trigger or catalyst that spills people over into symptoms. And again, this would more explain why or how some people can step off these drugs and be fine. Their system hadn't been building up more and more sensitization from multiple triggers. And also why people can take a drug for years and come off it with no withdrawal. And then years later, maybe things have kind of stacked up in the meantime. They take one dose and they just have these severe symptoms. I mean, nothing else to me makes a lot of sense. And I don't know, as far as the windows and waves pattern, these other chronic conditions, they call it flares. And it's the same type of thing, setbacks. Even chronic pain has the same type of kind of healing and recovery, and just the way the symptoms present, and how, I don't know, and even post-finasteride syndrome and all of these other things. It's very interesting to me. And I've wondered too, I've been listening to the audiobook, The Body Keeps the Score, which is about trauma. And he mostly is talking about PTSD that war veterans experience, but he also gets into more other types of trauma that people experience, and how the trauma process presents in people. And again, it's so similar to like windows and waves. So he'll talk about triggers and flashbacks, and it's not just about some distant memory of what happened. People are having real physiological, visceral responses to that trigger, and a lot of times that trigger is subconscious. And when you think about windows and waves, a lot of times the waves don't have a trigger. So maybe there's something going on subconsciously, just like in trauma, that re-triggers those experiences. And it's not just about a memory, or just about, more rapid breathing and rapid heart rate. Like, this can present like it did initially, which a lot of people, when they cold turkeyed or had that adverse reaction, they're immediately experiencing neurological symptoms. And I don't know, and you get preoccupied with it. You get really scared by what's happening, and you don't understand what's going on. And maybe as time goes on and you go through this windows and waves pattern, maybe there's a conscious or subconscious trigger. It's almost like a traumatic flashback that's then bringing up those same physiological, neurological symptoms that the initial injury caused. I don't know. I'm so fascinated in researching about these different things and how they're so similar, and what's the underlying mechanism to cause such similar symptoms in all of these conditions, regardless of whether psych drugs were involved or not. So just food for thought. Again, what are your thoughts on this? And I've really dived into this, not just about the sensitized nervous system underlying all these conditions, but also going deeper than that, and what could be stacking up. So the way that I have come to understand it as well, if you're going about it from this angle or with this theory, is that stressors, or things that are building up over time to eventually spill you into symptoms, it's not just psychological and emotional stress. It can be a chemical stressor. It can be physical, so trauma to the body. It can be surgery. It can be dental work. It can be a drug. It can be a virus, a bacteria. It can be, any type of infection. And I just find that so interesting. And I think you know, a lot of times, and I made a video about this, the top 3 causes of setbacks that I see, and stress was one of them, but that doesn't just mean emotional stress. It means all of the ones that I just listed, because I've seen people get re-triggered into symptoms years later without taking another drug. It can be something like COVID. It can be something like surgery or dental work or a tick bite or just stuff like that. And I don't say that to make people afraid. The message is not to be afraid of living life and moving forward. It's just, how do you keep that bucket kind of lower? And I've also deep dived into, sometimes certain people with certain personality traits are more prone to these chronic conditions. People who are more type A personality, they tend to be hustlers. They tend to work really hard and sometimes become like workaholics. They tend to be perfectionistic. They tend to be empathic. They tend to like to be in control. And I mean, when I first heard that, someone had sent me something a long time ago along those lines of, oh, this could be an underlying potential catalyst to put people into withdrawal or to be kind of stacking up the deck. And I was like, that is ridiculous. I thought it was totally Freudian and a bunch of BS. But now that I've really went down all these rabbit holes and searched all of these other conditions and looked at these patterns and coached so many people, I wonder sometimes if it's true, because as like, this is just a small sample, obviously, but the people I know personally who have never been affected by withdrawal and have taken psych drugs and cold turkeyed, they don't have those personality traits. They don't, and maybe it's not as much about that as it is about the stressors, or maybe it's both. I don't know. But everybody has stress, and not everybody ends up with these types of issues chronically. So maybe there's other things that are perpetuating that. Maybe you stay hypervigilant because you have these personality traits that tend to be more like a little bit more, what's the word? Stressful, I guess. I don't know. And it's never, and the way it was explained by this woman in this video, it's never like, oh, you just desensitize or you just expose yourself to your stressors or take your symptoms along for a ride and do something you haven't done and, oh, you're just fixed. It's a practice. It takes quite a long time to lower that and to desensitize the nervous system again. And it makes sense to me that, looking at it from that perspective, like when I talk to people in severe akathisia episodes, and I've had several of them in coaching calls, and just providing that really safe space and that calm reassurance, it is incredible how much someone's symptoms will dial down in the course of an hour. And it's not a magic bullet. They're not fixed, but it just goes to show like how much of it is just providing that safe space can make a difference. And in listening to this trauma book, he says the same thing, like the way out of trauma and working through trauma, you have to have that support system of people that make you feel safe. Like that's a huge part of it, because you don't feel safety. And he talks a lot about dissociation and extreme DPDR and how that's a response to trauma and stress, and however you kind of label all of these things. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling now, but I just wanted to share that, just what I was experiencing tonight and seeing that. Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, I hope you guys are doing okay, and I'll see you next time. Bye.